Hey, I am Kalia, and I am 27 years old. My mother, Sylvestra, is a culinary god, or at least, that is the lie the entire food industry swallowed whole for 3 decades. Growing up, our house never smelled like warm cookies or roasted chicken. It smelled of bleach, anxiety, and whatever rare truffle Sylvestra was obsessing over for her flagship restaurant, Le Clot. I basically raised myself while she yelled at line cooks and charmed food critics. She never cooked for me. Not once. If I wanted to eat, I had to figure it out. I learned to chop, sauté, and plate before I could even drive. Cooking became my survival mechanism, and eventually, my absolute obsession. By 22, I opened a tiny, rustic bistro called Opaline. No molecular gastronomy, no liquid nitrogen smokescreens. Just honest, deeply flavorful food that I sourced directly from local farmers. People noticed. Word of mouth spread fast, and soon we had a 3-month waiting list. I naively thought Sylvestra would be proud. A normal parent would look at their kid succeeding in their field and feel shared victory. But my mother only viewed the world through the lens of threats and assets. I was no longer her quiet, invisible daughter. I was competition. I just did not realize how far she would go to maintain her undisputed throne until the city health inspectors randomly showed up at my back door one Tuesday morning.
The inspectors marched into Opaline like they were raiding a cartel hideout. They ignored my polite greetings and immediately dismantled the walk-in fridge. Within 20 minutes, they claimed to find a massive rat infestation in the dry storage and expired, rotting meat shoved behind the fresh produce. I felt the blood completely drained from my face. My kitchen was spotless. I scrubbed those floors myself every single night. I personally checked every invoice and delivery. There was absolutely zero chance that filth belonged to me. Someone planted it. Before I could even protest or demand a reinspection, the local food blogs published the story. It felt painfully coordinated. Within hours, a notoriously ruthless critic named Jorin posted a scathing review of Opaline, claiming my signature braised short rib gave him aggressive food poisoning. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Reservations evaporated overnight. Regulars looked away when they passed me on the street. Vendors demanded cash up front, which I no longer had. The city slammed me with catastrophic fines, forcing me to shutter the doors permanently. I lost everything. My savings, my reputation, my absolute dream. The day I signed the bankruptcy papers, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sylvestra. Such a shame about your little cafe. This industry is too harsh for amateurs. Come over for dinner tonight. Let us discuss your next steps. She had not texted me in 6 months. The timing was sickeningly clear. She did this.
Walking into Sylvestra's penthouse felt like stepping into a sterile art gallery. She sat at the end of a long glass dining table, sipping a dark vintage wine. She did not even look up when I took the seat across from her. Instead, she pushed a folder toward me. Inside was an employment contract, a prep cook position at Le Clot. It was the lowest rung on her kitchen ladder, paying minimum wage, requiring brutally long hours peeling potatoes and scaling fish in the damp basement prep room. "You need money, Kalia," she said, finally meeting my eyes. Her tone dripped with a terrifyingly calm condescension. "You tried to run before you could walk. Opaline was a cute little experiment, but clearly you lack the discipline for true greatness. Come work for me. Learn how a real kitchen operates. Maybe in a few years I will bump you up to the line." I stared at the contract. My hand shook violently under the table. I wanted to scream, to flip the glass table and call her a manipulative monster. I knew she paid Jorin for that fake review. I knew she tipped off those corrupt health inspectors. But accusing her without hard evidence would only make me look like a bitter, failed daughter. She held all the power. I grabbed the pen and signed my name on the dotted line. "Thank you, Mother," I forced the words out. A cold, self-satisfied smile spread across her face. The basement prep room at Le Clot was a windowless, freezing dungeon. I spent my first month doing nothing but peeling hundreds of pounds of fruit vegetables until my fingers blistered and bled. The other prep cooks ignored me. They knew exactly who I was, and they assumed I was a spoiled heiress serving some weird form of punishment. I kept my head down, barely speaking a word, projecting the image of a completely broken woman. Sylvestra occasionally toured the basement, pausing just long enough to watch me struggle with a 50-pound sack of onions. She fed on my humiliation, but she drastically underestimated my patience. While everyone thought I was just mindlessly chopping carrots, I was mapping the entire operation. I noted the delivery schedules, memorized the faces of the suppliers, and tracked the inventory logs left carelessly on clipboards. Something strange caught my attention early on in my third week. Leclaw supposedly sourced its premium ingredients from exclusive European farms. The menus proudly advertised wild-caught Patagonian toothfish and authentic Wagyu beef. Yet I noticed a separate, unmarked delivery truck arriving twice a week at 3 in the morning. The driver never went through the main loading dock. He unloaded heavy, generic cardboard boxes directly into a locked secondary freezer room that only the head chef and Sylvestra had access to. The regular kitchen staff were strictly forbidden from ever going near that specific door.
The mystery of that locked freezer gnawed at me constantly. I knew I needed to get inside, but the digital keypad required a heavy-duty security code. I spent days watching head chef Marcel punch in those numbers from a distance. He always moved fast, shielding the pad with his broad shoulders. I needed a distraction. One busy Friday evening, I purposely dropped an entire hotel pan of hot veal stock right near his feet. It shattered, splashing onto his pristine chef shoes. As he cursed loudly and stepped back in disgust, he left his administrative tablet completely unlocked on the stainless steel prep counter. I slid my dirty towel over the screen, tapped into his security settings, and memorized the master code in a matter of seconds. I apologized profusely, grabbing a mop to clean the mess while he stormed off to change his shoes. I waited until 4 a.m., long after the last dishwasher clocked out. The restaurant was dead quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crept toward the secondary freezer. I punched the digits into the keypad. The heavy metal door clicked and hissed open. A blast of frigid air hit my face, smelling faintly of cheap preservatives. I flipped on the dim overhead light and stared at the towering shelves. There were no imported truffles, no artisanal meats, just endless pallets of mass-produced, low-grade commercial meat alternatives and synthetic flavor pastes shipped from a discount wholesale warehouse. I stepped deeper into the freezing room, my breath pluming in the harsh artificial light. I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures of the labels. Premium grade A synthetic binder, artificial truffle aroma base, commercial use only. The absolute audacity made my stomach churn. Sylvestra charged $600 a plate for a tasting menu built on chemicals and cheap filler. I tore open a cardboard box marked as wild-caught Patagonian toothfish. Inside sat vacuum-sealed blocks of cheap tilapia, heavily treated with food dyes and firming agents to mimic the texture of the rare fish. She was completely scamming her billionaire clientele, the food critics and the Michelin committee. It was a massive, multi-million-dollar fraud. My hands shook, but this time it was pure adrenaline. I recorded videos of the serial numbers, the wholesale logos, and the expiration dates. I made sure to capture the Leclaw inventory tags slapped directly onto the cheap boxes. I stood in that freezer for nearly an hour, gathering irrefutable proof of her deception. When I finally slipped out and locked the door behind me, a cold wave of clarity washed over my mind. Exposing her to a health inspector would just result in a fine. A bad review would be buried by her PR team. I needed to burn her legacy to the ground in a way she could never recover from. The next morning, I returned to my prep station acting completely normal. My blistered hands peeled potatoes while my brain worked through the logistics. Knowing about the fake ingredients was useless if I could not prove how they reached the dining room. I started paying close attention to head chef Marcel. He was fiercely protective of a small stainless steel lockbox on his prep station. Whenever an order for the signature Wagyu steak fired, he never let the junior sous chefs plate it. He always added a final mysterious glaze himself before sending it out. During the chaotic dinner rush, an intern accidentally knocked over a stack of hot plates, sending ceramic shattering across the line. Marcel rushed over to scream at the poor kid. I quickly slipped toward his station and opened the small lockbox. Inside sat rows of small dropper bottles containing concentrated chemical tenderizers and synthetic fat flavoring agents.
I snapped a photo of the chemical names and grabbed a tiny sample bottle, shoving it deep into my apron pocket just seconds before Marcel turned back around. Later that shift, Sylvestre glided through the kitchen in a designer suit. She stopped by my station, sneering at my messy apron. "You look exhausted, Kalia. Are you finally learning the value of hard work?" I forced a tired nod, keeping my voice utterly flat. "Yes, Mother. I am learning exactly how this kitchen operates." Gathering photos was a solid start, but a smart lawyer could claim a disgruntled employee planted the cheap food. I needed a paper trail linking Sylvestre's bank accounts directly to the discount wholesale supplier. That meant gaining access to the main administrative office on the top floor. Sylvestre kept that room locked tight, and her personal assistant, a nervous woman named Livia, guarded the door like a watchdog. I spent 2 weeks observing Livia's routine. She had a crippling addiction to a specific artisan espresso from a cafe 3 blocks away. Every day at precisely 3 p.m., she left the office for 20 minutes to get her fix. I waited for a torrential rainstorm on a Tuesday afternoon. Knowing Livia would take longer to walk back in the heavy rain, I slipped up the back stairwell the moment she left. The office door required a physical key, but I remembered Sylvestre always hid a spare inside a fake decorative plant near the bathroom. I grabbed the key, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. The room smelled of expensive perfume and leather. I bypassed the filing cabinets and went straight for the desktop computer. Thankfully, Livia had left the main accounting software open. My eyes scanned the massive ledgers. Millions of dollars were being quietly funneled into a shell corporation registered in Nevada, which then paid the discount food warehouses. I plugged a small flash drive into the computer and hurriedly downloaded the last 5 years of financial ledgers. The progress bar crawled, mocking my racing heartbeat. If Sylvestre walked in, the game was over. I would face criminal trespassing charges. At 99%, I heard the elevator ding down the hallway. I yanked the drive out, closed the accounting window, and dove under the heavy mahogany desk, just as the office door swung open. Heavy footsteps clicked against the hardwood floor. It was Sylvestre. She picked up a ringing phone, arguing loudly with a PR manager about an upcoming television appearance. I held my breath, pressing my back against the dark wood, praying my wet shoes did not leave a mark on the rug. She paced around the room for 5 agonizing minutes before slamming the phone down and walking back out. I scrambled from under the desk, locked the door behind me, and escaped down the stairwell. I now possessed the complete financial blueprint of her fraud. I went home that night and laid out all the evidence on my cheap kitchen table: photos, chemical samples, and banking records. I had the weapon. Now I needed the absolute perfect stage to pull the trigger. I opened my laptop and typed the name of the most feared, incorruptible investigative food journalist in the country: Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne built his career destroying fake culinary icons. He hosted a highly rated, live-streamed documentary series that reached millions of viewers worldwide. I created a secure, encrypted email address and sent him a very brief message. I did not give him my real name. I just offered him the biggest scandal in modern restaurant history, attaching a single photograph of the fake tilapia boxes sitting inside Le Clot's secondary freezer. He replied within 10 minutes, demanding a meeting. We met at a rundown diner on the outskirts of the city. I slid a thick manila folder across the sticky table. He opened it, his eyes widening as he sifted through the printed ledgers and the chemical analysis of the flavor enhancers I had paid a private lab to test. "This is absolute madness," Elias whispered, staring at a document showing Sylvestre's shell company. "She is charging a fortune for literal garbage." I drank my black coffee, feeling a cold smile form on my lips. "I want you to do an episode on her, but you cannot just ambush her with an interview. She will deny it and bury you with lawyers." Elias looked up, intrigued. "Then how do we do it?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "You are going to approach her PR team. Tell them you want to film a live, career retrospective documentary celebrating her genius. She will never resist the flattery." Elias stared at me across the diner booth, drumming his fingers against the laminated table. A slow, predatory grin spread across his face. He loved the idea of using her massive ego against her. We spent the next 3 hours mapping out the entire trap. He would reach out to her publicist the following morning,
offering a 2-hour live broadcast from inside Leclat's kitchen during a busy Friday service. It was unprecedented access. Sylvestra took the bait immediately. She announced the documentary to the entire staff the very next day, strutting through the prep room like a conquering queen. She demanded absolute perfection, threatening to fire anyone who looked directly at the cameras. I kept my head down, aggressively scrubbing a cutting board, acting terrified of her wrath. Deep down, a nervous energy buzzed under my skin. This was real now. I had armed a bomb right under her feet, and she was cheerfully inviting millions of people to watch her stand on it. For the next 3 weeks, I played the miserable, broken daughter flawlessly. I let her insult my knife skills in front of the crew. I nodded submissively when she told me Opaland failed because I lacked vision. Every cruel comment just fueled my focus. I coordinated secretly with Elias, giving him the exact layout of the kitchen, pointing out the blind spots where he needed to place his hidden cameras. We were ready.
The day of the live broadcast felt like preparing for war. Camera crews invaded Leclat at dawn, setting up massive lighting rigs and laying thick cables across the immaculate tile floors. Elias walked in looking sharp, carrying himself with a relaxed confidence that completely masked our hidden agenda. Sylvestra greeted him with a terrifyingly fake, warm hug. She completely transformed her personality for the cameras. Gone was the screaming, abusive dictator. Suddenly, she was the nurturing, passionate culinary artist, speaking softly about her deep respect for organic farming and authentic ingredients. It actually made me nauseous to watch her perform. She dragged Elias around the main line, pointing out the imported truffles and the dry aging meat locker. She strategically ignored the basement prep room and the locked secondary freezer entirely. I stood at my station, chopping mounds of garlic, completely invisible in my stained apron. I wore a tiny wireless earpiece hidden under my hair, maintaining a direct audio link to Elias. He interviewed her while the dinner service began, asking softball questions to make her feel totally secure. Millions of viewers were tuning in online. The chat feed projected on a monitor in the dining room scrolled violently with praise and admiration. She really thought this was her crowning achievement. She had absolutely no idea the guillotine was already suspended directly above her neck. The dinner rush hit its peak around 8 o'clock. The kitchen was a loud, chaotic machine of clanking pans and shouting line cooks. Elias signaled his cameramen to move closer to the main expediting station, right where Sylvestra stood plating her signature dishes. Through my earpiece, I heard him shift his tone. The soft, flattering questions suddenly stopped. "Sylvestra, your menus rely heavily on exclusive European imports," Elias said, his voice dropping an octave. "You often speak about the integrity of your supply chain. How do you maintain such high volume without compromising that standard?" She did not miss a beat. She smiled perfectly for the camera, holding up a pair of long plating tweezers. "We never compromise. I personally vet every single farm we buy from. Transparency is my core philosophy." I practically gagged on the irony. Elias looked directly into the main camera lens. "Transparency is a beautiful concept. Let us test that right now." He pulled out his phone and tapped a button. Instantly, the live feed split. Half the screen showed Sylvestra in the kitchen. The other half cut to the pre-recorded video I took inside the locked secondary freezer, clearly showing the boxes of cheap, synthetic tilapia and chemical pastes bearing the Leclat inventory tags. The entire kitchen went dead silent. The only sound was the sizzling of meat on the flat-top grill. Sylvestra stared at the monitor mounted on the wall. The color drained completely from her face. Her perfect posture collapsed for a fraction of a second before her survival instincts kicked in. "Shut the cameras off," she hissed at the crew, dropping her tweezers. "This is a ridiculous fabrication. A disgruntled employee obviously staged this video to ruin my reputation." Elias did not flinch. He signaled his producers, and the screen shifted again. This time, it displayed the financial ledgers I stole from her office, highlighting the millions of dollars wired to the Nevada Shell Corporation, followed by the receipts from the discount chemical food supplier. "Are these bank records staged too?" Elias asked loudly, making sure his microphone picked up every word. "Because the Nevada Corporate Registry lists you as the sole owner of that shell company." Sylvestra stepped back, her eyes darting frantically around the silent kitchen. She looked like a trapped animal.
She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The live viewer count on the corner of the screen surpassed 5 million. The chat feed exploded with outrage. I dropped my knife onto the cutting board. The loud metal clack echoed through the frozen room. I wiped my hands on my dirty apron and walked out from the back corner, stepping directly into the bright camera lights.
Sylvester saw me walking toward her, and a look of pure, unadulterated horror crossed her face. She finally understood. I stood right next to Elias, staring directly into my mother's eyes. "It was not a disgruntled employee," I said, my voice steady and surprisingly calm. "It was me." The camera operators practically shoved their lenses into our faces, capturing the raw, ugly reality of the moment. "You destroyed Opaline. You bribed health inspectors and paid critics to bankrupt my restaurant because you could not stand the thought of me succeeding without you. You forced me into this basement to humiliate me, but all you really did was give me the keys to your entire fraud." Sylvester lunged forward, her hands shaking with rage. "You ungrateful little brat! I gave you everything! You stole from me!" she screamed, completely abandoning her refined public persona. The mask was entirely gone, replaced with the vicious, toxic woman I grew up with. "I just showed the world who you actually are. You serve garbage wrapped in lies, and you charge people a fortune for it." The head chef, Marcel, pulled off his apron and walked out the back door without saying a single word. The rest of the line cooks slowly followed his lead, abandoning their stations. The empire was crumbling live on the internet.
Sylvestra stood paralyzed amidst the abandoned kitchen stations. Left unattended, the sizzling grill started smoking, sending the acrid smell of burning meat into the bright lights. She finally snapped, screaming frantically at the camera crew, demanding they cut the feed immediately. But the damage was permanently etched into the internet. Millions had already watched her meticulously crafted empire burn to the ground. I turned my back on her manic shouting and walked out the heavy loading dock doors into the cool night air. My chest heaved violently. I fully expected a massive wave of euphoric triumph to wash over me. Instead, a hollow, bitter ache settled deep in my stomach. She was still my mother. Despite decades of emotional abuse, destroying her felt like ripping out a core piece of my own history. My phone started vibrating relentlessly in my pocket. Texts flooded in from old Opaline employees, emails from former vendors, and breaking news alerts from culinary blogs. The clip of our brutal confrontation was already multiplying across social media platforms. Elias followed me out into the alley a few minutes later, lighting a cigarette in the shadows. He exhaled a long cloud of smoke and offered me a tight, respectful nod. We executed the plan perfectly. The city authorities and federal investigators would descend on that building by morning. I peeled off the stained, foul-smelling prep apron, tossed it violently into a nearby dumpster, and walked down the damp street without looking back once.
The fallout hit the city like a localized hurricane. By 8 o'clock the following morning, the Department of Health suspended La Classe operating license indefinitely. They permanently padlocked the heavy glass front doors. The state attorney general launched an aggressive, highly publicized fraud investigation regarding the Nevada shell company. Financial backers sued her instantly. The Michelin committee publicly stripped her of every single star. She frantically hired expensive crisis management firms, but they dropped her within 48 hours when the sheer volume of undeniable evidence became public record. I stayed barricaded in my tiny apartment, watching the daytime news anchors gleefully tear apart her legacy. She attempted to spin a desperate narrative, claiming I illegally doctored the footage out of spiteful jealousy. Nobody believed a single word of her excuses. The private lab reports on the synthetic chemical tenderizers leaked to the press, sealing her fate completely. Wealthy clients who paid exorbitant prices for her fake-tasting menus filed massive class action lawsuits. A judge froze her bank accounts pending federal review. The sheer speed of her downfall terrified me on the primal level. One broadcast dismantled a 30-year career. I spent my quiet days drinking cheap tea, staring blankly out the window, processing the chaotic silence of my new reality. I felt entirely numb. A sharp knock on my door startled me late Thursday afternoon. I found my old sous chef from Opaline, a brilliant kid named Mateo.
standing in the dim hallway.
Matteo handed me the cardboard pastry box and dropped onto my faded couch. He did not ask how I was doing. He knew better than to offer hollow sympathy. He just opened his battered laptop and turned the bright screen toward me. "The bank is legally foreclosing on Leclat's building," he stated simply. Silvestra dangerously leveraged the actual physical property to pay off her massive initial legal retainers. Since the federal judge froze her assets, she instantly defaulted on the commercial mortgage. The property goes to a closed auction next month. I stared at the official bank listing, my heart skipping a chaotic beat. That building was an architectural masterpiece, located right in the center of the city's culinary district. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Matteo, I am legally bankrupt. I live in a cramped studio apartment. I cannot afford to bid on a multi-million-dollar commercial property." Matteo smiled knowingly, pulling a thick manila folder from his backpack. "You cannot afford it alone, but your new investors certainly can." He explained how the explosive documentary made me a revered underground hero in the restaurant community, the independent vendors Silvestra abused, the local farmers who respected my honest work at Oberlin, and several wealthy clients who watched the live stream, desperately wanted to back my return. They quietly set up a blind trust. They gathered enough capital to aggressively bid on the property. I spent the next 3 weeks secretly meeting with these wealthy backers. We convened in dark corners of local dive bars and quiet coffee shops to avoid the lingering press. I meticulously reviewed their financial terms, demanding absolute creative control over the new restaurant. They agreed without a single moment of hesitation. They did not just want a financial return on their massive investment. They wanted to fund the ultimate poetic justice. Meanwhile, the daily news regarding my mother grew increasingly grim. Her massive luxury townhouse went into rapid foreclosure. The paparazzi captured grainy photos of her moving boxes into a cheap, rented condo on the far outskirts of town. She looked completely haggard, her expensive designer clothes hanging loosely off her thinning frame. A dark, twisted part of me desperately wanted to call her. I wanted to ask how it felt to lose your entire identity overnight, just like I did when she destroyed Opaline. But I kept my phone turned off. Absolute silence was a far sharper blade. The morning of the commercial auction arrived with a heavy gray downpour. I wore a sharp black suit, styling my hair exactly how Silvestra used to demand for high-end charity events. I wanted to look like the exact threat she always feared I would become. Matteo drove me to the county courthouse. We walked through the heavy wooden doors into a crowded gallery.
The auctioneer began rattling off the standard legal disclaimers from his tall wooden podium. I sat perfectly still, tightly clutching the blind trust authorization documents in my lap. Bidding on the Leclat property started at a shockingly low baseline because the bank desperately wanted to liquidate this toxic asset quickly. A few aggressive corporate real estate firms threw up their numbered paddles, trying to steal the prime location for cheap office conversions. I let them fight it out for the first 10 minutes, quietly watching the price slowly climb. Suddenly, the heavy courtroom doors swung open loudly. Shocked whispers erupted across the crowded gallery. Silvestra walked down the center aisle, flanked by a nervous bankruptcy attorney. She looked frantic, aggressively clutching a small leather briefcase against her chest. She marched straight toward the front row, immediately locking eyes with me. Her pale face contorted into a mask of pure hatred when she realized exactly why I sat there holding a registered bidder's paddle. She whispered frantically to her lawyer, who quickly raised his hand to enter a new bid. She was illegally trying to buy her own building back through a hidden proxy, using whatever cash she had left hoarded overseas. I felt my blood run entirely cold. She never accepted defeat. The auctioneer acknowledged her lawyer's desperate bid. I slowly raised my paddle in the air, matching it instantly. The auctioneer called out my counterbid, his voice echoing loudly against the high vaulted ceiling. Silvestra's attorney immediately shot his paddle back up. The crowd grew dead silent, sensing the incredibly toxic blood feud playing out in real time. We went back and forth for 3 agonizing minutes. Every time she raised the price by $50,000, I instantly topped it without breaking eye contact. I watched the frantic panic slowly consume her face. She leaned aggressively over her lawyer's shoulder, demanding he keep bidding, but he heavily shook his head. He tapped the leather briefcase, whispering something that made her face entirely crumble.
She had hit her absolute cash ceiling. She maxed out whatever hidden offshore funds she managed to smuggle past the federal freeze. I sat perfectly still, holding my paddle high in the air, feeling the immense weight of the blind trust backing me. "Going once," the auctioneer declared, scanning the silent room. Sylvestra grabbed the attorney's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his cheap suit. "Going twice," he continued, completely ignoring her pathetic breakdown. I did not smile. I did not blink. I just watched her empire permanently slip through her fingers. Sold. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down. I legally owned the building that housed my trauma.
I signed the immense stack of legal paperwork at the clerk's desk, my hand moving mechanically across the dotted lines. The physical reality of owning that massive space felt completely surreal. When Matteo and I finally exited the stuffy courtroom into the marble hallway, Sylvestra stood blocking our path. Her lawyer had wisely abandoned her. She looked incredibly small, a hollow shell of the terrifying tyrant who ruined my life just months ago. "You think this makes you a chef," she hissed, her voice shaking violently with rage. "You think stealing my walls gives you my talent? You will fail in that building, Kalia. The industry will never respect a traitor." I stopped walking and looked down at her. A profound sense of pity finally replaced the bitter hatred burning inside my chest. She literally had nothing left but her delusions. "I did not steal your walls," I replied softly, feeling the tension finally drain from my shoulders. "I bought them at a heavy discount because you destroyed their value. I am going to rip out your kitchen, throw away your fake ingredients, and build something real over your ashes." She raised her hand, entirely ready to strike me right across the face in front of the county guards. I did not even flinch. I just waited. She slowly lowered her arm, realizing she possessed absolutely no power anymore.
Matteo unlocked the heavy glass doors of Le Clot later that afternoon. The stale air inside smelled faintly of chemical cleaners and old fryer oil. The dining room sat exactly as we left it on the night of the live broadcast. Half-empty wine glasses cluttered the tables, and expensive linen napkins lay discarded on the floor. It looked like a luxury ghost ship. I walked straight past the dining room, ignoring the imported Italian chandeliers, and marched directly into the kitchen. I stopped right in front of the locked secondary freezer. I grabbed a heavy metal meat mallet off the prep counter and smashed the digital keypad until the plastic housing completely shattered. The heavy door groaned open. The boxes of cheap tilapia and synthetic truffles still sat stacked on the metal shelves, waiting to be served to absolute fools. "Throw every single box into the alley," I told Matteo, tossing the mallet onto the stainless steel counter. "Then hire a demolition crew. I want the main line gutted. I want the private dining rooms torn down. I want this entire space completely stripped to the bare concrete floors." We spent the next 3 weeks physically dismantling her legacy. I personally took a sledgehammer to the massive mahogany desk in her upstairs office, swinging the heavy iron until the wood splintered into jagged chunks.
We rebuilt the space from the concrete up. I ripped out the dark, oppressive luxury elements and installed massive glass windows to let natural sunlight flood the dining room. I wanted zero secrets in my restaurant. I placed an open concept kitchen directly in the center of the floor plan, so every single guest could see exactly what we were cooking. I refused to hire formal, stiff waitstaff. I brought back my entire original crew from Opaline. I hired local culinary students who possessed genuine passion over seasoned veterans poisoned by toxic kitchen cultures. We named the new restaurant Viridian. We sourced everything directly from the local farmers who stood by me during the bankruptcy. I spent my mornings physically walking the muddy fields, inspecting the heirloom tomatoes, and negotiating fair prices with the people actually growing the food. The menu changed daily based on whatever fresh produce came out of the dirt that morning. We did not serve heavily manipulated foams or chemically altered steaks. I cooked honest, deeply flavored meals. Word spread aggressively through the city that Kalia had returned to the exact spot where her mother fell. The reservations booked out entirely before we even finalized the paint colors. The pressure felt incredibly heavy, but it was a clean, pure weight. I was no longer fighting ghosts.
Opening night arrived with a chaotic, beautiful energy.
The kitchen roared to life, but nobody screamed. Mateo ran the expediting station with a calm, steady rhythm, guiding the young line cooks through the intense dinner rush. The dining room echoed with loud, genuine laughter instead of hushed, intimidating whispers. I stood at the main pass, plating a simple roasted duck breast with a wild berry reduction. I looked out into the brightly lit room and spotted Elias sitting at a corner table. He raised his glass of red wine, offering a quiet salute. The food critics arrived in full force, including Joran, the man who ruined Opaline on my mother's payroll. I did not kick him out. I served him the exact same braised short rib he previously lied about. I watched him take the first bite, close his eyes, and physically melt into the chair. He published a glowing, deeply apologetic review the next morning, publicly admitting Silvestra heavily bribed him to write the hit piece. The success felt entirely different this time. I did not feel a desperate need to prove myself to anyone. I simply stood in my bright, open kitchen, listening to the loud clatter of pans, completely disconnected from the dark shadow that haunted me for 27 years.
The morning after opening night, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of impending disaster did not sit heavy on my chest. Viridian was completely booked for the next 6 months. The local newspapers celebrated my survival. But as I drank my coffee in the quiet solitude of my apartment, a weird, unsettling numbness crept in. I destroyed my mother. I effectively erased her entire existence from the culinary world. The local news channels reported her looming federal court date relentlessly. The state prosecutors charged her with massive corporate fraud, grand larceny, and severe health code violations. Her expensive lawyers abandoned her when the retainer funds ran dry, leaving her with an overworked public defender. I watched a brief clip of her walking up the courthouse steps. She looked frail. The sharp, intimidating aura that terrorized me my entire life had completely evaporated. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I hated her for what she did to Opaline, for treating me like a disposable asset. But seeing her reduced to a pathetic, shivering woman shielding her face from the aggressive paparazzi cameras felt profoundly disturbing. Vengeance did not taste like sweet victory. It tasted like cold ash. I won the war, but the battlefield was my own family. I spent the rest of the day hiding in my kitchen, aggressively prepping vegetables just to keep my mind completely occupied.
2 weeks later, the federal prosecutor subpoenaed me for a formal deposition. They needed my sworn testimony to definitively link her to the Nevada Shell Corporation. I walked into the sterile, heavily air-conditioned conference room wearing a plain gray sweater. Silvestra sat across the long wooden table. She wore a cheap, faded blouse I had never seen before. Her graying roots showed prominently. When she looked up at me, her eyes lacked the usual vicious fire. They just looked terribly empty. The prosecutors started laying out the heavily documented evidence I had stolen from her computer. He walked through the massive financial transfers, the fake invoices, and the chemical food orders. I answered his questions with short, direct sentences. Yes, I saw the secondary freezer. Yes, I downloaded those specific files from her locked office. Every single word I spoke tightened the legal noose around her neck. Her public defender barely objected. He knew the case was entirely unwinnable. Midway through the agonizing process, Silvestra slowly leaned forward. She ignored the lawyers completely and locked her exhausted eyes directly onto mine. "Are you happy now, Kalia?" she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "You finally got exactly what you wanted. You took my restaurant. You took my entire life." The room went dead silent. The court reporter stopped typing. I stared back at her across the massive wooden table. My throat felt incredibly tight. A younger version of me would have screamed, crying about the childhood she stole and the dreams she aggressively crushed. But the woman sitting in that chair had absolutely zero tears left for her. "I did not take your life," I answered, keeping my voice dangerously flat. "You threw it away the moment you decided your ego mattered more than the truth. I just stopped covering for you." Silvestra flinched violently, as if I had physically struck her across the face. She slumped back into her stiff chair, staring blankly at the ugly carpet. She finally realized I was completely immune to her manipulation. The prosecutor wrapped up the deposition an hour later. He shook my hand,
quietly thanking me for my cooperation. I grabbed my coat and walked out of the suffocating room without looking back at her again. That was the absolute last time I ever spoke to my mother. She did not even take the case to trial. Facing a devastating mountain of irrefutable evidence and zero financial resources to fight, she accepted a brutal plea deal. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in a federal minimum security prison, plus millions in mandatory restitution she could never realistically pay. The Silvestre empire officially ceased to exist.
The day she reported to prison, it rained heavily. I did not go to the facility to watch her surrender. I stayed inside my warm kitchen at Viridian, testing a new recipe for a rich, slow-braised lamb shank. I spent the entire afternoon adjusting the acid and salt, focusing intensely on the deep, earthy flavors. Mateo stood next to me, quietly peeling garlic. We did not discuss the news alerts flashing across our phones. We just cooked. A bizarre, heavy grief washed over me as the dinner service started. I was not mourning the woman who went to prison. I was mourning the phantom mother I always desperately wanted, but never actually had. I grieved the imaginary woman who would have taught me how to bake bread, who would have proudly attended Opaline's opening night, who would have hugged me instead of sabotaging me. That realization broke me down momentarily. I stepped into the walk-in refrigerator, closed the heavy metal door, and let myself violently sob for exactly 2 minutes. The cold air burned my lungs. I wiped my face with a rough paper towel, took a deep breath, and walked right back onto the busy line. The tickets were piling up. My team needed me. I grabbed a hot pan and threw myself back into the beautiful, chaotic rhythm of my own kitchen.
Over the next year, Viridian evolved into something incredibly special. We earned massive national recognition, not through aggressive PR campaigns or bribery, but through the honest word of people who genuinely loved our food. We maintained a strictly healthy environment. I mandated a 4-day work week for my staff. I provided full health insurance. If a customer ever yelled at my servers, I personally kicked them out the front door. I actively worked every single day to be the exact opposite of the monster who raised me. The generational trauma ended permanently with me. I occasionally caught myself snapping at a prep cook during a brutally stressful rush. Whenever that happened, a terrifying cold sweat would break out across my neck. I would immediately stop the entire line, look the kid in the eye, and loudly apologize in front of everyone. I refused to let her toxic ghost haunt my restaurant. We made mistakes, we burned food, and we dropped plates, but we never lied to our guests, and we never punished each other for being human. One Tuesday morning, a small envelope arrived in the restaurant's mail stack. It bore a stark federal prison return address. I recognized her sharp, slanted handwriting immediately. I did not open it. I walked directly to the alley and dropped it into the dumpster.
Throwing away that letter felt like breaking a physical chain. I did not need to know if she was apologizing or sending more venom. Her words simply did not belong in my world anymore. Viridian continued to thrive. We expanded our community outreach, teaching free cooking classes to kids from underfunded neighborhoods. I wanted to show them that a kitchen could be a place of immense joy and creation, rather than a prison of fear. Mateo eventually stepped up as my executive chef, running the day-to-day operations with an incredible, quiet confidence. I stepped back just a little bit. I finally allowed myself to rest. I bought a small, rundown farmhouse outside the city. It had a massive backyard where I planted my own messy, imperfect garden. I grew heirloom tomatoes that came out lopsiding and carrots that twisted into weird shapes. I loved them specifically because they were completely flawed. I spent my weekends digging in the actual dirt, feeling the sun on my back. I stopped obsessing over the pursuit of absolute culinary perfection. I started cooking for myself again, just simple meals. Scrambled eggs on toast, a quick pasta thrown together with whatever I pulled from the garden. For the first time in 27 years, my house actually smelled like a home.
The 1-year anniversary of Viridian arrived on a chaotic Friday night. The dining room was completely packed, buzzing with loud conversations and the clatter of silverware. Elias Thorne walked in right at 8 o'clock, slipping into his usual corner booth. I sent out a massive plate of our signature roasted duck and walked over to sit with him for a few minutes. He raised his glass, clinking it gently against my water glass. He told me the network just won a major journalism award for the documentary we made together.
It felt incredibly strange to celebrate the exact moment my family fractured permanently. I thanked him, but I admitted I never actually watched the final edit of the broadcast. I lived the nightmare. I did not need to relive it in high definition. He understood completely. After the service ended and the last dishwasher clocked out, I stood alone in the center of my dark, quiet kitchen. I ran my hand along the cool stainless steel prep counter. I realized the burning, vindictive anger that fueled me for an entire year was completely gone. I did not hate Sylvestra anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy apathy. The revenge was entirely absolute. I completely dismantled her. Now, I just had to live with the quiet space she left behind.
People often assume getting revenge fixes the deep broken parts inside of you. They think destroying the person who hurt you automatically heals the wound. It really does not. Burning down LaClaw and sending my mother to federal prison did not magically give me a happy childhood. It did not erase the agonizing memory of her ruining Opaline. It just stopped her from ever hurting anyone else. The real healing happened long after the cameras turned off and the lawyers went home. It happened in the quiet mornings when I woke up and realized I was completely safe. I built my own security from the absolute ground up. I looked at the incredible, dedicated team working at Veridian. I saw the young cooks laughing on the line, feeling respected and valued. I created that environment. I broke the cycle of abuse with my own 2 hands. I proved that you can achieve massive success in this brutal industry without becoming a toxic, manipulative monster. I chose to be a mentor instead of a dictator. That was my ultimate victory. The financial ruin and the public humiliation were just the necessary tools I used to permanently remove her from the equation. The life I built in the aftermath was the actual triumph. I was finally entirely free. I never saw Sylvestra again. I heard through old culinary contacts that she struggled immensely in the prison system. She tried to assert dominance in the cafeteria, trying to critique the low-grade food they served. They quickly put her in isolation for starting fights. It was a pathetic, fitting end for a woman who worshipped status above humanity. She is scheduled for release in a few years, but she has absolutely nothing to return to. Her assets remain seized to pay off the massive court restitutions. Her reputation is entirely toxic. The industry aggressively moved on without her. As for me, I am 32 now. I married an incredible guy who does not know a single thing about fine dining. He thinks my basic grilled cheese sandwiches are the greatest culinary achievement on earth, and I honestly love him for it. We are expecting a baby girl this winter. I already know exactly what kind of mother I am going to be. My daughter will grow up in a house that smells loudly of warm cookies and roasted chicken. She will never have to earn my love by being perfect. She will just be loved. The nightmare is officially over. The ghost is gone. I took my life back completely.
Wow, taking you guys through that entire journey was incredibly heavy. Thank you so much for sitting with me and listening to my story. If there is one massive lesson I took away from this whole ordeal, it is that toxicity thrives in silence. People like my mother get away with abusing their power because everyone around them is too terrified to speak up or challenge the illusion. You never have to stay loyal to someone who actively destroys your peace, even if that person is your own blood. Family is supposed to be a safe harbor, not a battlefield. Standing up for yourself is terrifying, but living a lie to protect your abuser is 1,000,000 times worse. I had to burn down my own world to finally find some peace. But I have to ask you guys a serious question. Do you think my revenge was justified, or did I go entirely too far by sending my own mother to federal prison and stealing her building? Let me know your honest thoughts down in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another crazy real-life drama. See you in the next video.